The rain came down like a judgment. Sergeant First Class Marcus Hayes gripped the steering wheel of his battered pickup truck, his knuckles bone-white against the cracked leather. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle, slapping back and forth in a frantic rhythm that did nothing to clear the downpour. Oregon roads were treacherous on a good day, but tonight they were a death trap. Beside him, his German Shepherd, Ranger, sat at attention. The dog never relaxed when the truck was moving through a storm. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, his body swaying perfectly with each curve of the road. Ranger had been with Marcus since Afghanistan, a military working dog retired after taking shrapnel meant for Marcus during a firefight in Kandahar. They had saved each other more times than Marcus could count. Marcus reached for the radio dial, turning down the static. The noise reminded him too much of radio interference from convoys, the kind that preceded ambushes. He blinked hard, forcing the memory back into its locked compartment. Suddenly, Ranger stiffened. The dog let out a low, vibrating hum from deep in his chest, a sound Marcus felt more than heard. Ranger's nose pressed against the passenger window, his hackles rising along his spine. Marcus's foot hovered over the brake. He trusted Ranger more than he trusted his own instincts. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from disuse. Ranger whined sharply and tapped his paw against the dashboard, urgent, insistent. Marcus squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. At first, there was nothing but darkness and the relentless downpour. Then a shape materialized from the gloom, walking dangerously close to the road's crumbling edge. It was a person. Marcus swore under his breath and slammed on the brakes. The old truck shuddered and groaned, tires fighting for traction on the slick asphalt. They came to a stop just yards behind the figure. The person kept walking, a slow, shuffling gait that looked exhausting and aimless. Marcus threw the truck into park and pushed open the door. The roar of the storm was immediate and overwhelming. Cold water soaked through his worn canvas jacket within seconds. "Hey," Marcus shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Stop." The figure didn't respond, just kept moving toward the curve where the road dropped away into darkness. Marcus ran. His body moved with the muscle memory of a soldier trained to act without hesitation. He caught up to the stranger just as the road narrowed dangerously. Marcus reached out and grabbed the person's arm, pulling them back from the edge. The figure spun around, losing balance. Marcus caught them, holding them upright. It was an old man, maybe 75, maybe older. He wore a suit that might have been expensive once but was now sodden and ruined. No raincoat, no hat, just a thin jacket clinging to his shivering frame. Silver hair plastered to his skull, water streaming down the deep lines of his face. But it was the eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They were pale blue, wide with terror and completely lost. They looked through Marcus, not at him, as if seeing something or someone that wasn't there. "I have to get there," the old man gasped, his teeth chattering so hard the words were barely intelligible. "The mission. They're counting on me. I can't be late." Marcus tightened his grip to steady him. "Sir, there's no mission. It's midnight. You're in the middle of a storm." The old man shook his head frantically, water flying from his face. "No, no, no. The coordinates, I have the coordinates. They need the intel. I can't fail them again." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in soldiers who'd been awake too long, who'd seen too much. But this was different. This man wasn't young. This wasn't combat fatigue. This was something broken in a different way. The old man tried to pull away, his frailty terrifying against Marcus's strength. "Please, let me go. They're waiting. I'm already late." Marcus realized that logic wouldn't work here. The man was operating on a different frequency entirely. Marcus needed to take command. He straightened his spine, his entire demeanor shifting from confused driver to infantry sergeant. "Sir, look at me," Marcus commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it was made of iron. It cut through the wind and the panic. The old man blinked, his gaze momentarily focusing on Marcus's face. "Mission change," Marcus said firmly, using the cadence he'd learned leading men through chaos. "Transport has arrived. We need to extract you from this position. Do you understand?" The military language seemed to pierce the fog. The chaos in the old man's eyes settled slightly, replaced by an instinctive response to authority. "Transport," the old man whispered. "Yes, sir, my vehicle is right there. We need to move now." The old man nodded slowly, his body sagging as adrenaline left him. Marcus wrapped an arm around the man's waist, taking most of his weight, and guided him back toward the idling truck. Ranger was waiting. The dog hadn't barked. As Marcus opened the passenger door, Ranger moved gracefully to the center console, making room. Getting the old man into the high cab was a struggle. His legs were stiff with cold, and he shook violently. Marcus leaned in, bracing his shoulder against the man's back, hoisting him upward with a grunt. As Marcus bent forward, his old challenge coin, a brass medallion from his unit, shifted in his pocket. It was worn smooth from years of worry, a connection to the life he'd left behind. Unnoticed in the chaos, the coin slipped silently from his pocket and fell into the crack between the seat cushions. Marcus slammed the door and ran to the driver's side. When he climbed in, the warmth of the heater felt like salvation. The old man huddled against the door, shivering so hard his bones seemed to rattle. Ranger didn't wait. The dog crawled carefully across the console and rested his heavy head on the old man's knee. Then, sensing the profound cold radiating from the stranger, Ranger pressed his entire body against the man's side. Marcus watched, his hand pausing on the gearshift. Ranger was usually wary of strangers, protective, suspicious of anyone who came near Marcus. But tonight, the dog's instincts had shifted from defense to comfort. The old man looked down, his trembling hand reaching out to bury itself in Ranger's thick fur. "A wolf," the old man whispered, a faint smile touching his blue lips. "They sent a wolf to guide me." "He's a dog, sir. His name is Ranger," Marcus said softly, putting the truck into gear. "He'll keep you warm." The drive back to town was slow and tense. Marcus kept his eyes on the treacherous road, but his ears were tuned to the passenger seat. The old man's shivering began to subside as Ranger's body heat seeped into him. He muttered quietly to himself, reciting what sounded like coordinates and call signs from a life lived decades ago. "Who are you?" the old man asked suddenly, his voice clearer now. "Just a driver, sir," Marcus replied, "getting you somewhere safe." "You sound like him," the old man murmured, his eyes closing. "Like the sergeant, good man, solid." Marcus didn't reply. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He wasn't solid. He was a man barely holding himself together. They reached the small-town police station 10 minutes later. The building was a brick block of light in the drowning darkness. Marcus pulled up right to the front doors and left the truck running. He went inside and alerted the desk officer, a young woman who looked up in surprise. "I found a man walking on Route 9 near the ravine," Marcus said, cutting off her greeting. "He's confused. I think he has dementia or something. He's freezing." Marcus led 2 officers out to the truck. They helped the old man down carefully. The stranger looked back at the cab, reaching out as if he'd left something precious behind. "The wolf," the old man mumbled. "I need the wolf." "He'll be fine, sir," Marcus said, standing back in the rain. "You go with them, they'll find your family." One of the officers, a man Marcus recognized vaguely as Sergeant Daniels, nodded at him. "Good work, Hayes. We had a call about a missing person from the Ashford estate 2 hours ago. This must be him. We'll need a statement." "I'm late for work," Marcus lied. His shift didn't start until morning, but the walls of the police station made his skin crawl. He couldn't stand the questions, the paperwork, the feeling of being scrutinized. "I found him, I brought him in. That's the statement." Before the officer could protest, Marcus climbed back into his truck and slammed the door. Ranger was sitting in the passenger seat, looking at the empty spot where the old man had been. He whined softly. "He's safe, Ranger," Marcus said, his voice weary. "We did our job." Marcus threw the truck into reverse and pulled away, eager to escape, eager to return to the anonymity of his small rented room above the hardware store. As the taillights faded into the storm, Marcus reached instinctively into his pocket to rub his thumb against his challenge coin, a habit he performed countless times a day to ground himself. His fingers met only empty fabric. Marcus frowned, patting his other pockets while keeping one hand on the wheel. Nothing. He assumed he'd left it on his nightstand, or perhaps it had fallen into the laundry. He didn't panic. He'd find it later. He always found it. Unaware of the loss, Marcus drove on into the night, leaving behind the old man, and the only piece of metal that proved who he used to be. The brass coin lay wedged deep in the seat, silent and hidden. A seed planted in darkness that would soon grow into something neither Marcus nor the old man could have predicted. Part 2. The Confrontation. The morning sun rose pale and cold over the small Oregon town, offering no warmth, only a gray light that made everything look worn and tired. Marcus Hayes sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at the wall. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the old man's face, terrified, lost, calling out for coordinates that no longer mattered. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands and stood. His body ached. His back, his knees, his shoulders, everything hurt. At 42, he felt twice that age. The Army had used him up and spit him out with a medical discharge and a small disability check that barely covered rent. Ranger lay on the floor beside the bed, watching Marcus with alert brown eyes. The dog never really slept either. They were both haunted by the same ghosts. "Come on, boy," Marcus said quietly. "Let's get some air." They walked through the quiet streets as dawn broke. The storm had passed, leaving the roads slick and littered with broken branches. Marcus's mind kept drifting back to the old man. He wondered if the stranger was okay, if his family had found him. By noon, Marcus was restocking shelves at the hardware store where he worked part-time. It wasn't much, but it kept him busy. The owner, an older man named Pete, didn't ask questions and didn't mind that Marcus brought Ranger to work. The dog lay quietly in the corner, never causing trouble. Marcus was organizing boxes of nails when the door chimed. He looked up and saw a woman walk in. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in an expensive coat that didn't belong in a place like this. Her dark hair was pulled back and her eyes, pale blue, just like the old man's, were filled with exhaustion and determination. She walked straight to the counter where Pete stood. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for someone, a man who might have been here last night. He drives an old truck, probably has a dog with him." Marcus froze behind the aisle. His instinct was to stay silent, to let Pete handle it. But Ranger, hearing the woman's voice, stood up and walked toward her, his tail wagging slowly. The woman looked down at the dog and her breath caught. "You," she whispered, kneeling down. "You're the wolf." Ranger leaned into her hand as she scratched his ears. The dog's reaction surprised Marcus. Ranger didn't trust strangers. Marcus stepped out from behind the aisle. "Can I help you?" The woman stood quickly, her eyes locking onto his. "Are you Marcus Hayes?" Marcus's guard went up instantly. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Dr. Emily Ashford," she said. "You found my father last night." Marcus nodded slowly. "The old man on the road, is he okay?" "He's safe now," Emily said, her voice tight with emotion. "Physically, at least, but he's been asking for you. He keeps talking about the sergeant and the wolf. He won't eat. He won't sleep. He just keeps saying he needs to see you." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just a guy who gave him a ride. I'm not." "Please," Emily interrupted, her voice cracking slightly. "My father has Alzheimer's. Most days he doesn't recognize me, but last night you got through to him. You calmed him down when no one else could. I don't know how, but you did." Marcus looked away. He didn't want to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to be left alone. "I can't help you," Marcus said quietly. "I don't know anything about Alzheimer's." "I'm not asking you to cure him," Emily said. "I'm asking you to visit him, just once, please. He's terrified and you're the only person who made him feel safe." Marcus looked down at Ranger, who was sitting beside Emily's leg as if he'd known her his whole life. The dog looked back at Marcus, and in that gaze, Marcus saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: purpose. "One visit," Marcus said finally. "That's all I can do." Emily's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you so much." She gave him the address, a large estate on the edge of town, and left. After she was gone, Pete walked over to Marcus. "That was kind of you," Pete said. Marcus didn't respond. He just went back to stocking shelves, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. The Ashford estate was not what Marcus expected. It was a sprawling property surrounded by tall iron gates and manicured lawns. Marcus felt out of place the moment he pulled his rusted truck into the circular driveway. Emily met him at the door. "He's in the study," she said. "He's been waiting." Marcus followed her through the house, Ranger padding quietly beside him. The walls were lined with expensive art and family photos. It was the kind of place that screamed old money, the kind of place Marcus had never belonged. They entered a large room filled with bookshelves and leather furniture. The old man sat in a high-backed chair near the window, staring out at the lawn. He looked smaller than he had in the rain, more fragile. "Dad," Emily said gently, "someone's here to see you." The old man turned his head slowly. When he saw Marcus, his eyes widened. "Sergeant," he whispered. Marcus stepped forward. "Yes, sir." The old man stood, his hands trembling. "You came back, I thought you'd left me behind." "I wouldn't do that, sir," Marcus said quietly. The old man reached out and gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "The mission. Did we complete the mission?" Marcus glanced at Emily, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to play along. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "Mission accomplished. Everyone made it home." The old man's face crumpled with relief. He sank back into his chair, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Good, that's good. I didn't want to lose anyone else." Marcus knelt beside the chair, his voice low and steady. "You didn't lose anyone, sir. Everyone's safe." The old man looked at him with such gratitude that Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built years ago to keep the pain out. Ranger walked over and rested his head on the old man's knee. The stranger smiled, his hand moving automatically to stroke the dog's fur. "The wolf came back too," the old man said softly. Emily watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. She had spent years trying to reach her father, trying to pull him back to reality. But this stranger, this quiet, broken veteran, had done in minutes what she couldn't do in months. After a while, the old man grew tired. Marcus helped him to his bedroom, guiding him gently. As they walked, the old man leaned heavily on Marcus, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a weight he hadn't felt since he'd left the service. When the old man was settled in bed, he looked up at Marcus one more time. "Promise me you'll come back, Sergeant. Promise me you won't leave me alone in the dark." Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep, but looking into those frightened eyes, he couldn't refuse. "I'll come back, sir," Marcus said. "You have my word." As Marcus and Ranger left the estate, Emily walked them to the truck. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, climbing into the truck. "Yes, I do," Emily said firmly. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small brass object. "The police found this in their patrol car. It must have fallen out when they transported my father. I think it's yours." She held out the challenge coin. Marcus stared at it, his throat tightening. He took the coin from her hand, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. The eagle, the globe, the anchor, it was all there, worn smooth by years of worry. "How did you know it was mine?" Marcus asked quietly. "My father told me," Emily said. "He said the sergeant carried a piece of honor with him. He said it was the only thing keeping the darkness away." Marcus looked at her, then at the coin. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling it settle against his chest like a heartbeat. "I'll be back tomorrow," Marcus said. Emily smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the exhaustion in her eyes lifted slightly. "We'll be waiting." As Marcus drove away, Ranger sat in the passenger seat, his head held high. The dog looked at Marcus and let out a soft, approving huff. "Yeah, I know," Marcus muttered, rubbing the coin in his pocket. "We've got a new mission." And for the first time in years, Marcus Hayes felt like maybe, just maybe, he still had something to offer the world. Part 3: The Weight of Ghosts. Marcus returned to the Ashford estate the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. What started as a single visit became a routine, one that gave structure to Marcus's aimless days and purpose to his restless nights. Every morning, he and Ranger would arrive at the estate just after breakfast. Emily would meet them at the door, her gratitude written plainly on her face. She never asked Marcus why he kept coming back, and Marcus never offered an explanation. The truth was, he needed this as much as the old man did. Colonel Richard Ashford, that was the old man's name, had been a Navy officer during Vietnam. He'd served on a destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin, coordinating air support and watching young pilots fly missions they didn't always return from. The weight of those losses had carved deep lines into his soul, and now, decades later, his mind had retreated to those years, replaying them on an endless loop. Marcus understood that kind of haunting. Some days the colonel was lucid. He'd sit in his study, sipping tea, and talk about his wife, Margaret, who had passed 5 years ago. He'd talk about Emily, about how proud he was of her work as a trauma surgeon. Those were the good days. But other days, the colonel was gone, lost in the fog of his illness. On those days, he'd pace the halls, looking for his ship, calling out orders to men who no longer existed. On those days, Marcus would step in, speaking in the calm, authoritative voice of a sergeant, giving the colonel coordinates and mission updates that existed only in their shared language of service. It worked. Emily watched in awe as Marcus guided her father through the storms in his mind. She tried for years to correct him, to pull him back to the present. But Marcus didn't fight the disease. He walked alongside it, meeting the colonel wherever his mind happened to be. "You have a gift," Emily said one afternoon as they sat in the kitchen, watching the colonel nap in the next room. Marcus shook his head. "It's not a gift, it's just, I know what it's like to be stuck in the past." Emily looked at him carefully. "You don't talk about yourself much." "Not much to tell," Marcus said, staring into his coffee. "I doubt that," Emily said softly. Marcus didn't respond. He wasn't ready to unpack his own damage. Not yet. 3 weeks into the routine, something shifted. Marcus arrived one morning to find Emily standing on the front steps, her arms wrapped around herself despite the mild weather. Her face was tight with worry. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, Ranger immediately sensing the tension. "He's having a bad day," Emily said. "He thinks someone's trying to break into the house. He's barricaded himself in the study with a fireplace poker. I can't get him to open the door." Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked past her and headed straight for the study. He knocked once firmly. "Colonel, it's Sergeant Hayes. Open the door, sir." There was a long silence, then a trembling voice. "How do I know it's you? How do I know you're not one of them?" Marcus pressed his forehead against the door, thinking quickly. "Sir, I'm carrying your challenge coin. The one you gave me after the extraction. You said I'd earned it." Another pause. Then the sound of furniture scraping against the floor. The door opened a crack and the colonel's frightened eyes peered out. "Show me," the colonel whispered. Marcus pulled out his own challenge coin and held it up. The colonel stared at it, then slowly lowered the poker. He opened the door fully and stepped back. Marcus entered the room, Ranger following close behind. The colonel sank into his chair, trembling. "I thought they'd found me," the colonel said. "I thought they were coming to take me back." Marcus knelt beside him. "You're safe, sir. The perimeter is secure. I checked it myself this morning." The colonel's breathing slowed. He reached out and gripped Marcus's shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Sergeant." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his chest. That evening, after the colonel had calmed and gone to bed, Emily invited Marcus to stay for dinner. He tried to decline, but she insisted. It felt strange, sitting at the long dining table in a house that cost more than Marcus would earn in a lifetime. But Emily didn't treat him like hired help. She talked to him like an equal. "You saved him today," Emily said as they ate. "Again." "I just talked to him," Marcus said. "That's all." "It's more than that," Emily insisted. "You understand him in a way I never could. You speak his language." Marcus looked down at his plate. "It's not a language anyone should have to speak." Emily set down her fork. "What happened to you, Marcus?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't want to go there. But something about the way Emily looked at him, not with pity but with genuine curiosity and respect, made the walls crack. "Afghanistan," Marcus said quietly. "2 tour, infantry. I was a squad leader, 17 men under my command." "And?" Emily prompted gently. Marcus exhaled slowly. "And 3 of them didn't come home. 2 more came back in pieces, physically, mentally, or both. I was supposed to protect them. I was supposed to bring them all back." "That's not your fault," Emily said. "Isn't it?" Marcus looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "I made the calls, I gave the orders. When the IED went off, I was 20 feet away. I lived. They didn't, that's on me." Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You did your job. You did everything you could. The war did the rest." Marcus pulled his hand away gently. "Knowing that doesn't make it easier to sleep at night." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Emily spoke again, her voice soft. "My father has the same nightmares. He wakes up screaming for his pilots. He thinks he failed them. But he didn't. Just like you didn't fail your men." Marcus didn't argue. He wasn't sure he believed her, but he appreciated the effort. As Marcus prepared to leave that night, Emily walked him to the door. Ranger was already in the truck, waiting patiently. "Marcus," Emily said, stopping him, "I need to ask you something." Marcus turned. "What is it?" Emily hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "Would you consider staying here? Full-time, I mean. My father needs someone with him around the clock, and I can't always be here. I have a job, responsibilities at the hospital. But if you were here—" "I'm not a nurse," Marcus interrupted. "I'm not asking you to be," Emily said. "I'm asking you to be what you've already been, a friend, a guardian, someone who understands him." Marcus looked back at the house, then at Emily. "I don't belong here." "Yes, you do," Emily said firmly. "More than you realize." Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about his cramped room above the hardware store, the long, empty hours, the nights spent staring at the ceiling. Then he thought about the colonel, about the way the old man's face lit up when Marcus arrived, the way Ranger had taken to guarding him like he was part of the pack. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. Emily nodded. "That's all I ask." As Marcus drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Emily stood on the front steps, watching him go. She looked small and alone in the doorway of that big house. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He didn't know if he could do what Emily was asking. He didn't know if he was strong enough to carry someone else's burdens when he could barely carry his own. But as Ranger rested his head on Marcus's leg, the dog's steady presence reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. Sometimes, The best way to save yourself is to save someone else first. And maybe, just maybe, the Ashford estate wasn't a prison. Maybe it was a second chance. Part 4. The Breaking Point. Marcus moved into the Ashford estate on a cold Monday morning in late March. He didn't have much to bring: a duffel bag of clothes, a few books, Ranger's food and toys, and the challenge coin that never left his pocket. Emily had prepared a room for him in the guest wing, but Marcus had insisted on staying closer to the colonel. He'd taken the small room adjacent to the study, the one with a view of the front drive. It reminded him of a barracks: sparse, functional, defensible. The first few weeks were good. The colonel seemed more stable with Marcus nearby. The episodes of confusion still came, but they were shorter, less violent. Marcus fell into a rhythm: morning perimeter checks, breakfast with the colonel, walks around the property, afternoon reading sessions, dinner, and evening watch. It was the closest thing to military routine Marcus had felt since his discharge. Emily came and went, her hospital shifts demanding and unpredictable. But when she was home, she and Marcus would sit together in the kitchen after the colonel went to bed, talking quietly over coffee. They talked about everything: her work, his past, the strange comfort they both found in structure and purpose. Marcus began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: peace. But peace, Marcus had learned, was always temporary. The trouble started on a Thursday afternoon in April. Marcus was in the study with the colonel, reading aloud from a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. The colonel loved Hemingway, said it reminded him of his time at sea. Ranger lay on the rug between them, his eyes half closed in contentment. The doorbell rang. Marcus looked up, frowning. Emily wasn't expecting anyone. He set the book down and walked to the front door, Ranger following close behind. Standing on the porch was a man in his mid-50s, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the softness of his body. He had thinning hair, cold eyes, and the kind of smile that never reached past his teeth. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his hand instinctively moving to Ranger's collar. The man's smile widened, but it was predatory. "You must be the help. I'm Gerald Ashford, Richard's brother. I'm here to see him." Marcus's instincts prickled. Emily had never mentioned an uncle. "Do you have an appointment?" Gerald's smile faltered. "I don't need an appointment to see my own brother." "Dr. Ashford isn't home," Marcus said evenly. "I'll let her know you stopped by." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "I'm not asking for permission, soldier. Step aside." Marcus didn't move. "I can't let you in without Dr. Ashford's approval." Gerald took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not family. You're just the hired help. Now move, or I'll have you removed." Ranger growled, low and warning. Marcus kept his voice calm. "I'm not going to ask you to leave again. You need to go." Gerald's face flushed red. He pointed a finger at Marcus's chest. "You just made a big mistake, friend. A very big mistake." He turned and walked back to his luxury sedan, his movements sharp with anger. As he drove away, Marcus watched him go, his gut telling him this wasn't over. That evening, Emily came home to find Marcus and Ranger on the front steps, keeping watch. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately sensing the tension. "You had a visitor," Marcus said. "Gerald Ashford says he's your father's brother." Emily's face went pale. "He came here." "Tried to," Marcus said. "I didn't let him in." Emily sat down heavily on the steps beside him. "Thank God you didn't." "Want to tell me what that's about?" Marcus asked. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Gerald is my father's younger brother. They haven't spoken in 10 years. When my mother died, Gerald tried to have my father declared incompetent. He wanted to take control of the estate, sell it, and split the money. My father fought him in court and won, but it nearly destroyed him." "Why would Gerald come back now?" Marcus asked. "Because he knows my father's condition has worsened," Emily said bitterly. "He's probably planning another attempt to take control. if he can prove my father is incapable of managing his own affairs." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He's not getting near the colonel. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "Be careful, Marcus. Gerald is dangerous. He has money, lawyers, connections. He'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants." "So will I," Marcus said quietly. The next morning, Marcus was in the kitchen making breakfast when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello. Is this Marcus Hayes?" The voice was smooth, professional, and utterly insincere. "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm an attorney representing Gerald Ashford. I'm calling to inform you that my client intends to file a petition with the court to have Richard Ashford placed under conservatorship. As part of that process, we'll need to conduct a full evaluation of his living situation and the individuals providing his care." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "You're welcome to try, but you're not setting foot in this house without Dr. Ashford's permission." "That won't be necessary," Brennan said smoothly. "The court will appoint an independent evaluator. They'll have full access to the property and to Richard. There's nothing you can do to stop it." "We'll see about that," Marcus said and hung up. He immediately called Emily at the hospital. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense. "He's making his move," Marcus said. "His lawyer just called." Emily cursed softly. "I was afraid of this. Okay, I'll call our attorney, we'll fight it, but Marcus, you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said. "I know," Emily said, and there was something in her voice, trust, gratitude, maybe even something more. "Just be careful. Gerald will do anything to make you look unfit. Don't give him ammunition." Marcus hung up and stared out the window. Ranger sat beside him, sensing his master's unease. "We've got a new enemy, boy," Marcus muttered, "and this time we can't just outrun him." 2 days later, the court-appointed evaluator arrived. She was a thin, severe woman named Dr. Patricia Monroe, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of permanent disapproval. Marcus met her at the door, Ranger by his side. "I'm here to evaluate Richard Ashford's living conditions," she said without preamble. "I'll need full access to the house and to speak with him privately." "Of course," Marcus said, stepping aside. "The colonel is in the study." Dr. Monroe walked past him, her eyes already scanning the house with clinical detachment. Marcus followed at a respectful distance, Ranger padding silently beside him. The colonel was sitting in his usual chair, staring out the window. When Dr. Monroe entered, he looked up, his expression wary. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice artificially bright. "My name is Dr. Monroe. I'm here to talk to you for a little while. Is that okay?" The colonel looked past her to Marcus. "Sergeant." "It's okay, sir," Marcus said gently. "The doctor just wants to ask you some questions." The colonel nodded slowly, his trust in Marcus absolute. Dr. Monroe spent an hour with him, asking questions, taking notes, observing. Marcus waited outside, listening through the door. The colonel was doing well, answering clearly, staying calm. But then Dr. Monroe asked, "Richard, who takes care of you?" "The sergeant," the colonel said proudly. "He keeps the perimeter secure. He makes sure I don't get lost." "And this, Sergeant," Dr. Monroe said carefully, "is he a medical professional?" "He's a soldier," the colonel said, "the best I've ever served with." Marcus heard the skepticism in Dr. Monroe's silence. When she finally emerged from the study, her expression was unreadable. She looked at Marcus with cold eyes. "I'll be submitting my report to the court," she said. "You'll be notified of the findings." She left without another word. That night, Emily came home looking exhausted. Marcus told her about the evaluation, and she listened with growing dread. "She's going to recommend the conservatorship," Emily said quietly. "I can feel it." "We'll fight it," Marcus said. "With what?" Emily asked, her voice cracking. "Gerald has money, power, lawyers. We have, what? A retired soldier and a sick old man." Marcus stepped closer, his voice firm. "We have the truth. We have the fact that your father is safe, cared for, and happier than he's been in years. That has to count for something." Emily looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "I hope you're right." But deep down, Marcus wasn't sure. He'd seen systems fail good people before. He'd seen bureaucracy crush the innocent under its weight. And as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he realized that this fight wasn't just about the colonel. It was about proving that broken men still had value. It was about proving that Marcus Hayes, scarred, haunted, and barely holding on, was still worth something. And he'd be damned if he'd let Gerald Ashford take that away. Part 5. Gathering the Proof. The days following Dr. Monroe's visit were tense. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, her shoulders tight with worry. The colonel seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and became more agitated, packing the halls at odd hours, muttering about threats he couldn't name. Marcus did his best to keep the old man calm, but the strain was showing on all of them. Ranger, ever the vigilant guardian, barely left the colonel's side. The dog had taken to sleeping outside the old man's bedroom door at night, as if standing watch against invisible enemies. Marcus knew they were running out of time. Dr. Monroe's report would be submitted to the court within the week, and once it was, Gerald would move quickly to seize control. Marcus needed leverage, something concrete, something that couldn't be dismissed or twisted by expensive lawyers. He needed proof. It started with a conversation. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by legal documents and half-empty coffee cups. She looked up when Marcus walked in, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "I don't know what else to do," she said quietly. "Gerald's lawyers are tearing apart everything. They're saying Dad's estate is being mismanaged, that he's not receiving proper medical care, that he's being kept isolated by unqualified personnel." The last part hit Marcus like a punch. "They mean me." Emily nodded. "They're arguing that you have no medical training, no credentials, and that you're essentially holding my father captive for financial gain." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "That's garbage and they know it." "I know," Emily said, "but they don't have to prove it's true. They just have to create enough doubt, and they're very good at that." Marcus sat down across from her, his mind racing. What if we could prove the opposite? What if we could show that the colonel is thriving under the current arrangement? "How?" Emily asked. "It's my word against Gerald's, and he has 3 doctors willing to testify that Dad needs institutional care." "Then we get our own evidence," Marcus said. "We document everything. We show the court what life is really like here." Emily looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned forward. "We have security cameras in the house, right? The ones you installed after your mother passed." Emily nodded. "Yes, but I barely ever check them." "I want access to the footage," Marcus said. "All of it. From the last 3 months. If we can show the court how the colonel responds to me, how calm he is, how engaged, that's proof they can't dismiss." Emily's expression shifted from despair to determination. "Okay, let's do it." They spent the next 2 days combing through hours of security footage. What they found was both heartbreaking and powerful. The cameras had captured everything. The colonel's worst moments of confusion, the times he'd tried to leave the house in the middle of the night, the episodes where he'd lashed out in fear. But they also captured Marcus's responses. Calm, steady, never raising his voice, always speaking in that low, authoritative tone that cut through the panic. One clip showed the colonel standing in the hallway at 2 in the morning, convinced he was back on his ship during a storm. He was shouting orders, terrified. Then Marcus appeared, still in his sleep clothes, Ranger beside him. Marcus walked up to the colonel, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke quietly. Within minutes, the colonel had calmed. Marcus guided him back to bed, stayed with him until he fell asleep. Another clip showed a different kind of moment. The colonel was sitting in the study, lucid and relaxed, laughing at something Marcus had said. It was genuine joy, something Emily realized she hadn't seen in her father in years. "This is it," Emily whispered, staring at the screen. "This is what we need." But Marcus knew video evidence alone wouldn't be enough. They needed more. That night, Marcus called in a favor. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brennan, no relation to Gerald's slimy lawyer, was a former officer Marcus had served under in Afghanistan. She'd retired 3 years ago and now worked as a veterans advocate. Marcus hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but when he explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "You're being railroaded," Sarah said bluntly over the phone. "And I'm not going to let that happen. Send me everything you have. I'll make some calls." Within 48 hours, Sarah had assembled a small team: a veterans' rights attorney, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in dementia care, and a social worker with decades of experience in elder care. They agreed to review the case pro bono and, if warranted, testify on Marcus's behalf. The psychiatrist, Dr. Raymond Cole, came to the estate to observe the colonel firsthand. He was a kind man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a quiet demeanor. He spent an entire day watching Marcus and the colonel interact, during meals, during walks, during moments of clarity and moments of confusion. At the end of the day, Dr. Cole pulled Marcus aside. "You're doing something extraordinary here," Dr. Cole said. "The colonel's condition is advanced, but his quality of life is far better than most patients I see in institutional settings. You've created an environment where he feels safe, valued, and understood. That's incredibly rare." "Will you testify to that?" Marcus asked. Dr. Cole nodded. "Absolutely. And I'll make sure the court understands that removing him from this environment could do serious harm." Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Dr. Cole said. "Gerald's team will come at you hard. You need to be ready for that." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Emily and Marcus spent the weekend preparing, rehearsing their testimony, organizing documents. Sarah Brennan flew in from Colorado and took command of the legal strategy with the efficiency of a military operation. "They're going to try to discredit you," Sarah told Marcus on Sunday night. "They'll bring up your PTSD, your lack of formal training, maybe even your discharge status. You need to stay calm, answer honestly, and don't let them rattle you." Marcus nodded. He'd faced worse than hostile lawyers. But the thought of standing in front of a judge and having his worth questioned, his ability to care for someone he'd come to see as family, made his stomach churn. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat in the study with Ranger at his feet, staring at the challenge coin in his hand. It was worn smooth from years of worry, a talisman of a life he'd tried to leave behind. The colonel appeared in the doorway, wearing his pajamas and looking disoriented. "Sergeant," the colonel said quietly. Marcus stood. "Right here, sir." The colonel shuffled into the room and sat down in his chair. He looked at Marcus with clear, focused eyes, a rare moment of lucidity. "Emily told me about the hearing," the colonel said. "She thinks I don't understand, but I do. Gerald wants to take me away." Marcus sat down across from him. "We won't let that happen, sir." The colonel reached out and gripped Marcus's hand. "If they take me, I'll be lost. You're the only one who knows how to find me when I get lost in the dark." Marcus's throat tightened. "I'm not going anywhere, Colonel, I promise." The colonel nodded, his eyes glistening. "You're a good man, Marcus, a damn good man." They sat together in the quiet study, the weight of the coming battle pressing down on them both. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and Ranger let out a soft, protective growl. The fight was just beginning. But Marcus Hayes had never backed down from a fight in his life. And he wasn't about to start now. Part 6: The Courtroom. The courtroom was nothing like the battlefields Marcus had known, but it felt just as hostile. The air was thick with the smell of wood polish and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the rows of benches and the imposing judge's bench at the front. Marcus sat beside Emily at the defendant's table, his hands folded in his lap, his back straight. He wore the only suit he owned, a dark blue one he'd bought for his mother's funeral years ago. It was tight across the shoulders and smelled faintly of mothballs, but it was clean and pressed. Across the aisle, Gerald Ashford sat with his legal team, 3 attorneys in expensive suits, their briefcases open and filled with neatly organized documents. Gerald himself looked smug, his arms crossed, his expression one of barely concealed satisfaction. He glanced at Marcus once, and the look in his eyes was pure contempt. Marcus didn't look away. He met Gerald's gaze with the same steady calm he'd used to face down insurgents in Kandahar. Gerald blinked first. Behind them, the gallery was mostly empty. A few reporters had shown up, along with Sarah Brennan and the small team she'd assembled. Ranger sat at Marcus's feet, his presence a small comfort in the sterile room. The judge had allowed the service dog after Sarah had argued that Ranger was integral to the colonel's care routine. The colonel himself sat in the front row, beside a court-appointed aide. He looked small and confused, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. Emily had fought to have him present, hoping his lucid moments would speak louder than any testimony. But looking at him now, frail and disoriented, Marcus wasn't sure it had been the right call. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Helena Grant, entered the courtroom and everyone stood. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the documents before her. "Be seated," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We're here today for the matter of the conservatorship petition filed by Gerald Ashford regarding Richard Ashford. Let's begin." Gerald's lead attorney, Thomas Brennan, stood. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Your Honor," Brennan began, "this is a straightforward case. Richard Ashford is a 76-year-old man suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease. He is no longer capable of managing his own affairs or making decisions about his care. His current living situation is not only inadequate, it's dangerous." Brennan gestured toward Marcus. "Richard is currently under the care of Marcus Hayes, a man with no medical training, no professional credentials, and a documented history of post-traumatic stress disorder. While we do not question Mr. Hayes's intentions, we must question his qualifications. My client, Gerald Ashford, is prepared to provide his brother with professional, institutional care that meets the highest medical standards." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to stand up, to shout that the colonel didn't need an institution, he needed family. But Sarah had warned him to stay silent unless called to testify. Emily's attorney, a sharp woman named Claire Donovan, stood next. "Your Honor, the petition before you is not about Richard Ashford's best interests. It's about Gerald Ashford's financial interests. Richard is currently living in his own home, cared for by his daughter and a dedicated caregiver who has provided him with stability, dignity, and genuine compassion. The evidence will show that Richard's quality of life has improved under this arrangement, not deteriorated." Judge Grant nodded. "I've reviewed the initial filings. Let's hear the testimony. Mr. Brennan, call your first witness." The first witness was Dr. Patricia Monroe, the court-appointed evaluator. She took the stand with the same cold efficiency she'd brought to the Ashford estate. Brennan led her through a series of questions designed to paint Marcus as unqualified and the home environment as inadequate. "Dr. Monroe," Brennan said, "in your professional opinion, is Richard Ashford receiving appropriate care in his current living situation?" "No," Dr. Monroe said flatly. "While the home itself is clean and well-maintained, the primary caregiver lacks the medical training necessary to address Richard's complex needs. Alzheimer's patients require specialized care, medication management, behavioral interventions, safety protocols. Mr. Hayes, despite his good intentions, is not equipped to provide that. And what did you observe during your evaluation? Brennan asked. I observed a patient who is confused and disoriented much of the time, Dr. Monroe said. He referred to Mr. Hayes as the sergeant, indicating a delusional belief that he is still in the military. This suggests that his condition is not being properly managed. Emily whispered to Claire, "She's twisting everything." Claire nodded and stood when it was her turn to cross-examine. Dr. Monroe, during your evaluation, did you observe any signs of neglect or abuse? No, Dr. Monroe admitted. Did Richard appear malnourished or improperly medicated? No. And did you observe any moments of genuine connection or comfort between Richard and Mr. Hayes? Dr. Monroe hesitated. There were moments of calm, but that doesn't negate the overall inadequacy of the situation. Thank you, Claire said, sitting back down. No further questions. The next witness was one of Gerald's hired medical experts, a doctor who had never met the colonel, but was willing to testify that institutional care was the gold standard for Alzheimer's patients. His testimony was polished and rehearsed, but Claire dismantled it on cross-examination by pointing out that he had financial ties to the care facility Gerald was proposing. Then it was the defense's turn. Claire called Dr. Raymond Cole to the stand. He testified with calm authority, describing his observations of the colonel at home. He spoke about the importance of familiar environments for dementia patients, about the dangers of institutionalization, and about the extraordinary bond he'd witnessed between Marcus and the colonel. In my 30 years of practice, Dr. Cole said, I have rarely seen a caregiver as attuned to a patient's needs as Mr. Hayes. He doesn't just manage Richard's condition. He meets him where he is with dignity and respect. That is the highest form of care. Brennan tried to rattle him on cross-examination, but Dr. Cole didn't budge. Then Claire called Marcus to the stand. Marcus's heart pounded as he walked to the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Every eye in the courtroom was on him. Claire started with easy questions, his background, his service record, how he'd met the colonel. Marcus answered clearly, his voice steady. Then Brennan stood for cross-examination, and the tone shifted. Mr. Hayes, Brennan said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, you served in Afghanistan, correct? Yes. And you were honorably discharged due to a medical condition. Yes. That condition being post-traumatic stress disorder. Marcus felt the room shrink. Yes. And have you received treatment for that condition? Some, Brennan repeated, as if the word itself was damning. So you're asking this court to believe that a man with untreated PTSD is fit to care for a vulnerable, elderly patient? I'm not untreated, Marcus said, his voice hardening, and my condition doesn't affect my ability to care for the colonel. Doesn't it? Brennan pressed. Isn't it true that you suffer from nightmares, anxiety, and episodes of flashbacks? Sarah stood. Objection, Your Honor, relevance. Overruled, Judge Grant said. Answer the question, Mr. Hayes. Marcus took a breath. Yes, I have nightmares, I have bad days, but I have never let that interfere with my duty to the colonel. Brennan smirked. Your duty? You keep using military language. Isn't it true that you encourage Richard's delusions, that you pretend to be his commanding officer? I don't pretend, Marcus said. I meet him where his mind is. When he's scared, I give him structure. When he's lost, I help him find his way back. That's not encouraging delusions, that's compassion. Brennan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice rang out from the gallery. He saved my life. Everyone turned. The colonel was standing, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, his eyes blazingly clear. Dad, sit down, Emily whispered urgently. But the colonel ignored her. He looked directly at the judge. "That man," the colonel said, pointing at Marcus, "pulled me out of the rain when I was lost. He kept me warm. He made me feel like I still mattered. You want to lock me away in some facility where I'll die alone? Fine. But don't you dare call him unfit. He's the best man I've ever known." The courtroom was silent. Judge Grant looked at the colonel for a long moment, then at Marcus. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Please sit down." The colonel sat, his moment of clarity fading as quickly as it had come. Brennan tried to recover, but the damage was done. Judge Grant called a recess. In the hallway, Emily grabbed Marcus's arm. "That was incredible." Marcus shook his head. It might not be enough. But when they reconvened, Judge Grant's expression had shifted. She looked at Gerald, then at Marcus, and made her decision. "I've reviewed the evidence and heard the testimony," she said. "While Mr. Gerald Ashford's concerns about his brother's welfare are noted, I find that Richard Ashford is currently receiving adequate and compassionate care. The petition for conservatorship is denied." Gerald's face went red. "Your Honor." "My decision is final," Judge Grant said. "This court is adjourned." Marcus felt Emily collapse against him in relief. Across the aisle, Gerald stormed out, his lawyers scrambling after him. Marcus looked at the colonel, who smiled faintly and gave him a small salute. They'd won. For now. Part 7, The Storm Inside. The victory in court should have brought peace, but it didn't. Not really. Gerald Ashford left the courtroom that day with his tail between his legs, but Marcus knew men like him didn't give up easily. Men like Gerald were used to winning, to buying outcomes, to bending the world to their will. A single legal setback wouldn't stop him. It would only make him angrier and more dangerous. Still, for a few precious days, the Ashford estate felt lighter. Emily walked with her shoulders less hunched, the colonel seemed calmer, and even Ranger's vigilance eased slightly. They celebrated quietly that first night. Take-out Chinese food eaten at the kitchen table, the three of them talking and laughing like a family. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. It started 2 weeks after the hearing. Marcus was doing his morning perimeter check, a habit he'd never broken, when he noticed the black sedan parked across the street. It was subtle, the kind of vehicle that tried to blend in but didn't quite succeed in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's cars. Marcus made a mental note of the license plate and kept walking, Ranger trotting beside him. The sedan was there again the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th day, Marcus approached it. The driver, a thick-necked man in his 40s wearing sunglasses, rolled down the window. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his tone neutral but firm. "Just parked here," the man said. "Public street." "Right," Marcus said. "Just making sure you're not lost." The man smirked. "I know exactly where I am." Marcus walked back to the house, his jaw tight. He told Emily about the car that night. "It's Gerald," Emily said, her face pale. "He's watching us." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Because he's looking for a mistake," Emily said. "Anything he can use to go back to court. A missed medication dose, a fall, anything. He wants to prove we're unfit." Marcus felt anger simmer in his chest. He's not going to find anything. But the pressure was mounting. Marcus started second-guessing every decision, every interaction with the colonel. He checked and rechecked medication schedules. He documented everything, meals, walks, conversations. He barely slept, lying awake at night listening for any sound that might indicate trouble. The weight of responsibility was crushing him. One night, Marcus was in the kitchen making tea when Emily found him. She'd been at the hospital for a double shift and looked exhausted. "You're wearing yourself out," she said quietly, sitting down at the table. "I'm fine," Marcus lied. "No, you're not," Emily said. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Marcus didn't respond. He poured the tea and slid a mug across to her. Emily wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "Marcus, you don't have to do this alone. We can hire help, a part-time nurse, someone to share the load." "I don't need help," Marcus said, his voice sharper than he intended. Emily looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "You're allowed to be human, you know. You're allowed to need support." "I've got it handled," Marcus said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The cracks were starting to show. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. Marcus was sitting in the study with the colonel, reading aloud as he often did in the evenings. The colonel seemed content, his eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of Marcus's voice. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Then the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. The colonel gasped, his eyes going wide with panic. "They're here," the colonel whispered, his voice trembling. "They found us." "It's just the storm, sir," Marcus said calmly, reaching for his phone to use as a flashlight. "The power will come back on." But the colonel wasn't hearing him. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We need to evacuate. Where's the squad? We need to get everyone out." "Colonel, sit down," Marcus said, standing and placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. "It's safe. We're not in danger." The colonel shoved Marcus's hand away with surprising force. "Don't lie to me. I can hear them. They're coming through the wire." He lunged toward the window, his hands reaching for the latch. Marcus moved quickly, wrapping his arms around the colonel from behind to pull him back. The old man fought, kicking, thrashing, his strength fueled by pure terror. "Let me go," the colonel screamed. "They're going to kill us all." Marcus held on, his arms locked around the frail body. "You're safe, sir. I've got you." But the colonel wasn't safe, not in his mind. He was back in Vietnam, back on his ship during a firefight, surrounded by chaos and death. And Marcus, trying to hold him together, was the enemy. The colonel twisted violently, his elbow connecting with Marcus's ribs. Pain flared, but Marcus didn't let go. He couldn't. If the colonel got to that window, he'd hurt himself. "Emily," Marcus shouted, "I need help." Footsteps pounded down the stairs. Emily burst into the room, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. She saw Marcus struggling to hold her father and froze. "What happened?" she gasped. "The power went out," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "He's having an episode. Get his medication, the sedative." Emily nodded and ran to the kitchen. The colonel was still fighting, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus could feel the old man's heart hammering against his chest. "You're safe," Marcus repeated over and over like a mantra. "I've got you, you're safe." Emily returned with a small pill and a glass of water. Together, they managed to get the colonel to swallow it. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the medication took effect. The colonel's struggles weakened. His breathing slowed. He slumped against Marcus, exhausted. "I'm sorry," the colonel whispered, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry." "Nothing to apologize for, sir," Marcus said softly, guiding him toward the chair. "You did nothing wrong." They got the colonel settled and covered him with a blanket. He fell asleep within minutes, his face lined with exhaustion. Emily sank onto the sofa, her hands shaking. "I thought he was going to hurt you," she said quietly. "He wouldn't," Marcus said, though his ribs ached where the colonel's elbow had struck. "He doesn't know what he's doing." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "How much longer can we do this, Marcus? How much longer before something really bad happens?" Marcus didn't have an answer. Later that night, after the power had been restored and the colonel was asleep in his room, Marcus sat alone in the study. Ranger lay at his feet, sensing his master's turmoil. Marcus pulled out his challenge coin and stared at it. The brass was worn smooth, the engravings faded. He'd carried it through 2 tours in Afghanistan, through firefights and ambushes and long nights in the desert. It had been his anchor, his proof that he'd once been part of something bigger than himself. But now, sitting in this quiet house, he felt that anchor slipping. He was exhausted, he was scared, and for the first time since he'd walked through the Ashford estate's front door, he wondered if Emily was right. Maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe the colonel deserved better than a broken soldier who could barely keep himself together, let alone someone else. Marcus closed his hand around the coin, squeezing until the edges bit into his palm. He didn't know how much longer he could do this. But he knew one thing: he wasn't going to give up. Not yet. Part 8: The Golden Thread. Spring arrived slowly in Oregon, reluctant and cautious, as if even the season knew that the Ashford estate had endured too much to celebrate its coming without reservation. The rain softened into drizzle, the bare trees began to bud, and the mornings carried the faint scent of wet earth and possibility. Marcus Hayes stood on the back porch, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ranger sat beside him, his ears perked toward the sound of birds returning after the long winter. For the first time in months, Marcus felt something close to peace. It hadn't been easy to get here. In the weeks following that terrible night when the power went out, things had changed. Emily, seeing how close Marcus was to breaking, had finally convinced him to accept help. They hired a part-time nurse, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Linda who came 3 afternoons a week to assist with the colonel's medical needs. At first, Marcus had resisted, seeing it as an admission of failure. But Linda proved to be an ally, not a replacement. She respected Marcus's bond with the colonel and worked seamlessly alongside him. More importantly, Emily had insisted that Marcus start seeing a therapist, a veterans counselor who specialized in PTSD. Marcus had gone reluctantly to the first session, his walls up, his defenses high. But the therapist, a former Army medic named Dr. Andrew Mills, didn't push. He listened. And slowly, session by session, Marcus began to unpack the weight he'd been carrying for so long. The nightmares didn't stop, but they became less frequent. The hypervigilance eased, and Marcus began to understand that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was survival. The colonel's condition continued to decline, as Alzheimer's always does. There were more bad days than good now, more moments of confusion than clarity. But the bad days were manageable. Marcus had learned to navigate the storms in the old man's mind with patience and grace, and the colonel, in his lucid moments, still looked at Marcus with trust and gratitude. One afternoon in late April, the colonel was sitting in the study, staring out the window. Marcus sat across from him, reading. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "Marcus," the colonel said suddenly, his voice clear. Marcus looked up. The colonel was watching him, his pale blue eyes sharp and focused. "Yes, sir." "I want to thank you," the colonel said, "for everything you've done, for not giving up on me." Marcus set the book down. "You don't have to thank me, Colonel." "Yes, I do," the colonel said firmly. "I know I'm not easy. I know there are days when I don't even recognize my own daughter. But you never treated me like I was broken. You treated me like I was still a man worth something." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's because you are, sir." The colonel smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up his weathered face. "You're a good man, Marcus Hayes. Don't let anyone tell you different." It was one of the last truly lucid conversations they would have. By early May, the colonel's health had deteriorated significantly. He slept most of the day now, his body frail and weakened. Dr. Cole had warned them that the end was approaching. Emily took a leave of absence from the hospital to be with her father during his final days. Marcus stayed too, of course. He moved a cot into the colonel's room so he could be there if the old man needed anything in the night. Ranger lay on the floor beside the bed, his head resting on his paws, keeping vigil. One night the colonel woke in the darkness and called out softly, "Margaret." Marcus sat up immediately. "It's Marcus, sir, I'm here." The colonel turned his head on the pillow, his eyes glassy and distant. "Margaret, is that you?" Marcus hesitated, then made a decision. He'd spent months meeting the colonel where his mind was, and tonight that place was with his late wife. "Yes," Marcus said gently, "I'm here." The colonel smiled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I've missed you so much. I'm sorry I took so long to come home." "It's okay," Marcus said softly. "You're home now, everything's okay." The colonel reached out a trembling hand, and Marcus took it, holding it gently. "I love you," the colonel whispered. "I love you too," Marcus said, his voice breaking. The colonel closed his eyes, still smiling, and drifted back to sleep. Marcus sat there in the darkness, holding the old man's hand, tears running silently down his face. Ranger stood and rested his head on Marcus's knee, offering the only comfort he could. Colonel Richard Ashford passed away peacefully 3 days later, with Emily and Marcus at his bedside. It was a quiet death, gentle and without pain. Emily wept, but there was relief in her tears too, relief that her father's suffering was over, that he'd been able to leave this world surrounded by love. The funeral was small and dignified. A handful of the colonel's old Navy comrades attended, along with Emily's colleagues from the hospital and a few neighbors. Marcus stood in the back, Ranger at his side, feeling out of place among the mourners in their black suits and dresses. But when the honor guard presented the folded flag to Emily, she turned and walked straight to Marcus. She placed the flag in his hands. "He would have wanted you to have this," she said quietly. Marcus stared at the flag, his vision blurring. "Emily, I can't." "Yes, you can," Emily said firmly. "You gave him dignity, you gave him peace. You were his family, Marcus, this belongs to you." Marcus held the flag to his chest, unable to speak. In the weeks that followed, the estate felt emptier than it ever had. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, sorting through her father's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go. Marcus helped where he could, but mostly he just stayed out of the way, unsure of his place now that the colonel was gone. One evening, Emily found Marcus in the study, staring at the empty chair where the colonel used to sit. "What are you going to do now?" Emily asked, sitting down on the sofa. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I guess I'll find another job, move on." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "What if you didn't?" Marcus turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Stay," Emily said. "The house is too big for just me. I could use the help, and I don't want to lose you, Marcus." Marcus's heart clenched. "Emily." "I mean it," Emily said, her voice steady. "You're not just hired help, you're family, and I think my father would want you to stay." Marcus looked at her, at the hope and vulnerability in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. For so long, he'd been drifting, surviving but not really living. But here, in this house with this woman, he'd found something he'd thought he'd lost forever. He'd found a home. "Okay," Marcus said quietly, "I'll stay." Emily smiled, and for the first time since her father's death, the weight in the room lifted. Months passed. Marcus settled into his new role, not as a caregiver but as a partner. He and Emily renovated the guest cottage on the property, turning it into a small workshop where Marcus could build furniture, something he'd always enjoyed but never had time for. Ranger, now graying at the muzzle, spent his days patrolling the grounds and his nights curled up by the fireplace. On the anniversary of the colonel's death, Marcus and Emily stood together at his grave, a simple headstone in the veterans' cemetery on the edge of town. Emily placed flowers at the base of the stone, and Marcus stood at attention, saluting one last time. "Do you think he knows?" Emily asked quietly, "that we're okay?" Marcus looked at the headstone, then at Emily. "Yeah, I think he knows." They walked back to the car together, Ranger trotting ahead of them. As they drove home, Marcus reached into his pocket and felt the familiar weight of the challenge coin. He pulled it out and looked at it, the worn brass, the faded engravings, the history it carried. You know, Emily said, glancing at the coin, in Japan they have this art form called kintsugi. When something breaks, they repair it with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted. It makes the object more beautiful because it has a history. Marcus looked at her, then at the coin. I like that. Me too, Emily said, smiling. As the sun set over the Oregon hills, casting the world in hues of amber and gold, Marcus Hayes realized something he'd never thought possible. He wasn't broken. He was healing. And sometimes, healing was the bravest thing a person could do. The end.